It is absolute delight to see so many of you coming back to this Gatty lecture, especially when it's the week 16 of the semester. So I really appreciate that you found energy and time to attend this absolutely fantastic talk today. My name is Anna Kasheva, and I am a co-host of Gatty lectures of the academic season of 2021. And I am a PhD student here at the Asian Studies Department, and I study visual culture of Laos during the Cold War and the construction of alternative modernities and temporalities on the global margin. And this is why it is my absolute pleasure to have our PhD candidate, Anissa Rahadi, who also works with visual culture and art in Southeast Asia, to give us her talk today. And so before her talk, I will just quickly take you through the logistics of the talk, how we run Gatty's on Zoom, and then I will invite Alexandra to introduce our speaker today. So today we are in Zoom meeting. It basically means that luckily we can see everybody who is on the meeting today. We can see your screens. You are muted by the default for the beginning of the talk, so don't be surprised if you click the button unmute and it doesn't work. It is muted for now, and then once the talk is over, we will be running the Q&A session. For that, we will be actually unmuting you, but let me introduce the procedure of the Q&As. So Anissa's presentation will take approximately 45 minutes. By the end of that presentation, please prepare your questions and type them in the chat. And that will basically help us understand who has questions and in what kind of order we can be inviting you to provide the feedback and pose your question to Anissa. And then we will be inviting everybody from the chat who have the questions to present them to the speaker. And that's pretty much it. The logistics are very simple. I hope you will enjoy the talk. And so without any further ado, let me invite Alexandra to do the honors of announcing Anissa. Alexandra is a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology here at Cornell University. She's currently working with her, she's currently writing her dissertation about the politics and practices of sericulture and silk weaving in Surin, Thailand. And she pays particular attention to the sensory and affective dimensions of that processes. So let me hand over to Alexandra to introduce our wonderful speaker today.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks for the introduction. Today, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Anissa Rahadiningtyas, who will share her talk, Tulisan Jawi, Decolonizing the Modern and the Islamic in Indonesian Art. Anissa is a PhD candidate in the Department of the History of Art and Visual Studies at Cornell, and she is currently writing her dissertation, Islamic Art and the Makings of the Modern, which focuses on the works and lives of 4 artists who we will have the opportunity to learn more about today. Before coming to Cornell, Anissa completed bachelor's and master's degrees in art and aesthetics at the Institut Teknologi Bandung. She is committed to digital humanities and to creative, accessible ways of sharing her research. And this is evident in her recent projects on representations of Burak, the semi-mythical steed, which include a virtual exhibit hosted by Cornell Libraries and an article for the Jugad Project, an open access platform for scholarship on material religion in context. Anissa is also a part-time curator in the Asian Art Department at the Johnson Museum and an active participant in programming on modern and contemporary art in Indonesia. And she recently received funding from DCAPS to digitize and organize the previously undocumented archives of and works by Haryadi Suadi in collaboration with his family members and colleagues in Bandung. I'm so excited to listen to Anissa's talk, as I know many of you are, and so please join me in warmly welcoming her.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Alexandra. And thank you so much for organizing the SEEP colloquium this semester and for inviting me, the co-chair Anna and Kara. I also want to extend my gratitude to my advisor, Professor Kaya McGowan, and my committee members, Professor Iftikhar Dadi, Professor Talia Kozo, and Professor Chiara Formici. And the paper that I'm presenting today is a working paper that I hope to develop further. And so therefore I would really appreciate any kind of suggestions and feedbacks that could make this paper stronger and better as well. Yeah, so let me just start and share my screen. So the title of my talk is Tulisan Jawi, Decolonizing the Modern and the Islamic in Indonesian Art. In 2009, Arahmaiani led an iteration of her community-based and collaborative performance titled Flag Project, with an installation of a soft hanging sculpture made up of a colorful rendition of Jawi script that reads, "I love you" in English. This performance took place in Esplanade, Singapore in 2009. This footage is taken from a public archive on Vimeo. I'm indebted to the effort of Lindsay, a Vimeo user who I presume was on site when the performance occurred and recorded a video that they later edited and uploaded to the site on Monday, May 31st, 2009. Despite its seemingly amateurish technique and method of recording, the footage is well edited and it provides a record of how a performance art can be reconstructed by viewers at different times, albeit in its fragmentary and incomplete nature. Since I was not there, this documentation gives me a means of accessing the reality of this performance, and with other photographic documentations of the event, serve as a substitute for the real event itself. For this reason, my analysis of Arahmaiani's performance works will always be mediated by these documents and the particularities of their media, and therefore they will always be fragmentary as well. In this footage that opens with a distant shot of the esplanade, the camera moves swiftly into the interior of the open space where the "I love you" hangs on the ceiling. It then moves to the crowd of participants holding multicolored banners with different scripts and writings on them. After recording Arahmaiani giving instructions to her collaborators, the footage jumps to an activity outside where everyone moves and waves their banners. Arahmaiani is then seen running across the visual field with a yellow banner that reads, "I love you." Let me press forward, yes. Written with a yellow banner that reads, "I love you," written in Jawi in red. In addition to this phrase, collaborators also wave flags bearing words such as justice, mabuhay, and several others in Mandarin and other languages. In this work, Arahmaiani and the group that she worked with aim to address the multiracial and multi-ethnic social and political reality in Singapore while vernacularizing Islam through Jawi script that carries an active expression of love. This performance is the continuation and another edition of Arahmaiani's community-based work titled Proyek Bendera Nusantara, or the Nusantara Flag Project, that has undergone multiple recontextualizations since its initial appearance in 2006. The hanging installation of the soft sculpture also has precedent in her collaboration work titled Stitching the Wound on the left, with a silk weaving community in Bangkok, Thailand that occurred in the same year. At the core of these works is Arahmaiani's commitment and feeling of responsibility as a Muslim in extending transcultural dialogues that can regenerate reparative readings of Islam and Muslim in global contemporary world. In light of the inherent violence in the act of decolonization, Arahmaiani's work might serve as a means of negotiating such violence through community-based collaborative practice that encompass ritual and play. Amongst modern and contemporary artists in Indonesia, Arahmaiani is one of the few who explore the possibility of writing Jawi as a strategy to decolonize established conceptions of aesthetics and artistic practices. Arahmaiani reclaims Jawi as a writing system and tradition that was severely marginalized by the Dutch colonial education system in the 19th and 20th century. Tulisan Jawi or Jawi script is a localized writing system derived from Arabic that circulated in many parts of the Indo-Malay Archipelago. As a writing system in Indonesia, Jawi was largely forgotten, marginalized, and replaced when Roman script or Romawi was introduced through the Dutch colonial education system in the 19th and 20th centuries. While schools in the British Malaya still taught Jawi to students in the 1950s, albeit limited to certain subjects, it was largely out of use in newly independent Indonesia. Jawi was pushed to the margins of modernity of the new republic, as it existed mainly as a language in Muslim religious learning. Only those who studied in pesantren or the Quranic school or madrasah or Islamic school in rural Java and other parts of the archipelago, or those whose families prescribed extended study of Islamic ethics and jurisprudence after finishing reading the Quran, would learn Jawi using Kitab Kuning. Kitab Kuning is a term used to identify religious books and manuscripts that are written in Arabic script irrespective of the language. The name Kitab Kuning or Yellow Kitab comes from the tinted paper used in books that were printed in and imported from the Middle East in the early 20th century. According to Martin van Branusse, the use of kitab or book, which is Indonesian derived from Arabic, rather than buku, which is derived from Roman languages, also signifies a different reading public that historically refers to more traditionalist Muslims. However, Branusse further observes that the loosening sharp categories between the traditionalist and the modernist Muslims that continued up until the 1960s expanded the circulation of kitab in modern Islamic schools. Even so, the use of Jawi is still limited to religious context, inevitably reinforcing the majority of Indonesians' uneasy relationship with Arabic as a script. By quote-unquote modernist Islam, I refer to the conception articulated by Martin van Branusse that describes it as those movements that expressly seek accommodation of Islam with modernity, with emphasis on rationality and compatibility with modern science. This term is often interchangeable with reformist Islam or used in a much broader range of reformist movements in Islam that favor more literal readings of the Quran and Hadith. This movement arrived in waves to the shores of the archipelago from Cairo and Mecca since at least the 19th and early 20th centuries, mediated by Jawi pilgrims who went on the Hajj and stayed to study Islam in the heartland. It is often in conflict with traditional Islam, or Islam that had developed since at least the 15th century, that was circulated by traveling Sufis, traders, and performers. Many reformist Muslims regarded religious practices of some traditional and localized Islam as heterodox and therefore not or less Islamic. In this talk, I will discuss artist strategy in exploring the textual and artistic capacity of Jawi in their contemporary artistic practices since the 70s onward. While starting from and focusing on Arahmaiani, I will bring her works into dialogue with Ahmad Sadali, Pirous, and Haryadi Suadi, all of whom are the subjects of my dissertation project. Sadali's engagement with Jawi emerged out of his anti-colonial position and the nationalist search for identity during the New Order period in Indonesia with Islam at its root. While Sadali's conviction of the importance of Jawi is never manifested on his canvas, as far as I know, Pirous brought Jawi to contemporary audience as a way to approach Quranic texts that are mediated by Acehnese and Malay literary traditions. On the other hand, Haryadi's use of Jawi script focuses more on the production of meaning through its visuality rather than textual legibility. Jawi in Haryadi's works is a part of a constellation of symbols that don't necessarily reference their origins. Haryadi and Arahmaiani's works push the use of Jawi outside the realm of religious expression of normative piety and open the potential of Jawi as a site and a tool to challenge and complicate the narrative of global Islam and the notion of Islamic art as singular and homogeneous. I argue that, therefore, that these engagements with Jawi bring to the fore distinct memories, experiences, and strategies towards becoming modern and Islamic. This paper has developed out of a part of my dissertation titled Islam, Art and the Makings of the Modern in Indonesia, that focuses on the works and lives of Indonesian artists who take critical approaches to questions of art and aesthetics from the West as they seek to negotiate their lived traditions related to Islamic practice, philosophy, and theology. I suggest that each artwork produced by Muslim artists in modern Indonesia becomes a site of ethical and effective encounters and tension as it constructs and communicates different values, identities, and desires relating to discourses of Islamic authenticity and proper religiosity. Their works show how visual culture constitutes an important realm of quote-unquote permanent revolution as they respond to and oppose existing aesthetic conventions using new languages of representations to challenge doctrine, authority, or specific moral teachings. The four artists that I'm working with represent different generations of artistic training in Bandung, West Java. Formerly a colonial institution established by the Dutch in 1947 during the period of the Indonesian Revolution, the Universitaire Leergang voor de Opleiding van Tekenleraar gradually morphed into a state art school as the Faculty of Art and Design, Instituut Teknologi Bandung, or FSRD ITB. This generational difference prompts each artist to respond to different transnational and global discourses relating to art, modernity, and Islam that engender constant disruptions, revisions, and contradictions. Sadali and Pirous experienced a more direct conversation with international modernism introduced by their Dutch teachers through the formalist language of abstraction. Their pioneering effort in incorporating Quranic calligraphy in the late 60s and early 70s into their explorations of forms and materialities accorded them an authoritative position in the history of modern art and modern Islamic art in Indonesia. Their dominance in the Indonesian art world in the 70s until the 1990s was due also in some part to government patronage and support for developing newer expressions of modernity that were devoid of political criticism and distinct from Sukarno's preference of socialist modernism. Haryadi, who enrolled at the school after the departure of the Dutch faculty members in 1959, grappled with modernist abstraction and its reference to Western modernism that marginalized local conception of aesthetics. He and his generation of critics, such as Sananto Yuliman, featured here, challenged the primacy of modernist abstraction and painting as the only medium, and they worked to redefine and reorient modernism according to the Indonesian context. Their practice, criticism, and ideas against established artistic practices and pedagogy sustained by Sadali and Pirous that developed within the walls of the university reverberated across generations as well. The same rebellious spirit against dominant modernist aesthetics and traditions of art making was continued by young students from Bandung in their collaboration with students from Yogyakarta in the 1975 Gerakan Seni Rupa Baru Indonesia, or the Indonesian New Art Movement in 1975. This genealogy of resistance, however, is rarely fleshed out in scholarly discussions about the New Art Movement and the subsequent development of Indonesian contemporary art. Arahmaiani's generation pushed this change even further, addressing the masculine modernist aesthetics and its pretext of neutrality and disinterestedness in social and political issues. Using performance and installation as strategies of representations that foreground the agency of the body, especially the female body, Arahmaiani strived to inspire social and political changes during the authoritarian New Order regime. Arahmaiani's works from the 1990s and early 2000s attend to the issues of misogyny and violence against women and minority groups during the authoritarian period. Her subsequent works show a shift in focus as she seeks to present experiences and realities of Muslims and women that actively contribute to shaping the image of global Islam while continue to do the former. Performance and installation became Arahmaiani's method of political and environmental activism, where she gradually articulates the importance of collaboration as a strategy of reparation. I read reparation as a framework in post-colonial and feminist studies that is extended from Eve Sedgwick's approach of reparative reading. Arahmaiani's performance lives not only in video and photo documentations, as she repeats and recontextualizes her previous works in new reiterations or reenactments, as we will see in I Love You. In this paper, I engage with the notions of decoloniality developed by Walter Minolo from the decolonial school of thought initiated by Aníbal Quijano in the 90s. Drawing from Minolo, I understand decolonizing as an active process of delinking or detaching from the structure of knowledge that shape and are shaped by modernity and therefore coloniality. This delinking allows one to engage in what Minolo terms as quote-unquote epistemic reconstitution. According to Minolo, an epistemic reconstitution is achieved by reconstituting, quote, ways of thinking, languages, ways of life and being in the world that the rhetoric of modernity disavowed and the logic of coloniality implement, unquote. This artist's engagements with Jawi can be understood as one method for attending to the aforementioned tall order of decolonial objectives as they reconstitute a script, its history and memories, and its role in the transmission of knowledge that was destituted and marginalized by the colonial system of power and institutions. Each artist engages and reworks Jawi in various levels in order to decolonize the established aesthetics of modern and modern Islamic art, as well as the dominant discourses of Islam and of being Islamic. On a scattered typed up note that Sadali seemed to have prepared for an article or a talk, he expressed his observation of the absence of Islam in the history of modern art in Indonesia. Sadali detailed several reasons. 1, colonial policy against Islam in the colony. 2, post-colonial trauma and inferiority complexes that result in the reverence of anything Western, including art. And 3, the continuation of the colonial education system in Indonesia that gradually replaced Arabic script with Romawi as the writing system in schools. This process resulted in removing Islam even further from the consciousness and daily practices of the people, intellectuals, and artists in Indonesia. In this draft pages filled with handwritten notes, Sadali argued that these are the reasons why artists had neglected Islam as the guiding principle in life, and thus had neglected to produce art inspired by Islam. Sadali further noted that these are the conditions that inflicted the development of Islam and Islamic art in Indonesia. This note critically pinpoints the social and political processes that led to the diminishing role of Jawi in public practical matters. Colonial policies against Islam in Java became increasingly systematized after the Java War that happened from 1825 to 1830. To prevent future uprisings like that of the Java War, which was a rebellion that united peasants and aristocracy under the banner of Islam, the colonial government was determined to sever affiliations between the royal courts and pesantren, or the Quranic school. Javanese royals were discouraged from forming any connections with the kiais or hajis, or religious teachers and leaders, who mostly built their authority in pesantrens in rural areas. As noted by Peter Carey, this approach also increased the gap between the aristocracy and the kiais, exacerbated by the institutionalization of kulturstelsel, or the forced cultivation system in 1830. This gap turned into a class struggle as the kiais were seen as the representation of the lower class and pesantrens as sites of struggle against the ruling elites in the latter half of the 19th century. The Dutch continued to undermine the role and position of Islam in Java's social and cultural identity. One of the strategies used to further widen the sociocultural gap was to construct a distinction between court art and folk art, and to develop a colonial canon of local cultures. Laurie Sears has discussed how 19th and 20th century Dutch colonial discourses minimize the important religious roles of Islam. Looking closely at the stories and performances of wayang, or Javanese shadow theater, Sears notes that the colonial suppressions of the outward expression of Islam by Javanese regents, and the Dutch scholarly preference for Hindu Javanese rather than Islamic knowledge, were cultural strategies to impose the view that Islam in Java was merely superficial. The contact between some Javanese Muslims with the Arabian Wahhabi movement also exacerbated this erasure of Islam from Javanese cultural traditions. After the Dutch changed the status of the Indies from a commercial venture to a colony, the Dutch colonial government instituted a more expansive establishment of the education system that further marginalized pesantren education in the Netherlands Indies. Along with the instatement of the ethische politik or ethical policy in 1901, the government built more schools as a way to uplift the people through education and cultural association with the Netherlands. The Dutch established a 3-year volkschool or village school, where the Western type elementary education system was first introduced to the masses. Many Javanese, especially those with royal ties or from priai families or small nobilities, preferred to enter the Dutch school as it guaranteed them future placements as colonial government officials. In these schools, training in Roman script and command of Dutch and other European languages naturally became more necessary than Arabic or Jawi. As noted by Sadali, disuse and spread of the Roman script by the Dutch violently replaced Jawi, which is also known as Arapegon in Java, as a script that could and should have been part of the modern Indonesian language system. Sadali's note evokes the discourse of loss of Islamic identity and belonging due to colonial violence that resulted in the stunted development of calligraphy as a form of modern artistic expression. Thus, for Sadali to decolonize the modern artistic practice in Indonesia, one must acknowledge this colonial erasure and work to emphasize the importance of Islam and its textual and material manifestations. Pirous' explorations of Arabic script started with rendering Quranic verses into his lukisan calligraphy, a practice of incorporating Quranic calligraphy into modernist abstract paintings that he pioneered with Sadali. Different from calligraphy murni, or pure calligraphy or traditional calligraphy, lukisan calligraphy is defined in the context of Indonesian modern Islamic art as, quote, painting that adopts the forms and characters of calligraphy and transforms it into a new and complete form, unquote. In the 80s and 90s, lukisan calligraphy developed into the canonical representation of modern Islamic art as it was perceived as a proper expression of Islamic religious piety. Pirous' 1985 painting perhaps marks his early use of Jawi that was meant to show great emphasis on legibility and meaning. This emphasis on producing proper writings that engender immutable meaning is highlighted by the juxtaposition of the Quranic text with its translation in Malay, written in Jawi, composed in the style of a page from an Islamic manuscript. The importance is further demonstrated in the long title of the painting, which also summarizes the meaning of the verse 27 from Surah Luqman. Sehutan kalam, selautan mangsi, tiadalah asma Allah tertuliskan, or a forest of pens, a sea of ink, the beautiful names of God never ceased being written. I think I wrote it wrong here. In this painting, Pirous replicates the visuality and structure of Islamic illuminated manuscript rendered in off-white and light ochre. The texts are housed in a chamber divided by a thick golden line made by pasting gold leaves, referencing the long tradition of illuminating manuscripts with gold in parts of Islamic Southeast Asia. In this painting, the Quranic verse of Surah Luqman is positioned on the left side with its translation in Malay on the right. Pirous orients the viewer to read the Quranic verse first before the translation, as both Arabic and Jawi reads from left to right. The Quranic verse reads as follows: "Walau anama fil ard min shajarah aqlam wal bahr yamuddu min ba'di sab'ah abhur ma nafidat kalimatullah innallaha azizun hakim." And if whatever trees upon the earth were pens and the sea was ink, replenished thereafter by 7 more seas, the words of Allah would not be exhausted. Indeed, Allah is exalted in might and wise. while the Malay translation is written in Jawi on the right as follow. Sekiranya segala pohon yang di bumi merupakan kalam dan samudra merupakan mangsi, ditambah lagi 7 lautan sesudah itu. Tiadalah kata Allah bisa dituliskan. Sungguh Allah Maha Perkasa, Maha Bijaksana. Kenneth George argues that the use of Jawi in his painting displays Pirous' effort to localize universal Islam to its specific development and translation in the Malay world. I will add that through this work, Pirous also reintroduced the importance of Jawi as a cultural and literary product of the propagation of Islam in the Indo-Malay Archipelago. Jawi is the evidence of the adaptability of Islam and the transmutability of the Arabic script. Pirous' use of Jawi is a way to reclaim the script's profound importance in the transmission of knowledge and circulation of Islam in the archipelago since the 15th century. This painting brought Jawi to a contemporary audience whose relationship with Jawi and Arabic remain only as memories of a distant past and religious text. In the context of this painting, however, juxtaposing Jawi with the calligraphic rendition of a Quranic verse reiterates the relationship of Jawi only to its religious function. Haryadi Suadi's prints and paintings that often make use of calligraphic text expand the use of Jawi outside of religious narratives, or perhaps even resist religious narratives. Haryadi's glass painting titled Borak from 1986 is one of his works that I analyzed in my chapter about Haryadi and the maintenance of Sufi expression in modern art. Painted on a slippery surface of glass in reverse, the painting presents Haryadi's reinterpretations of the widely known and circulated image of the Borak. The Borak is a hybrid semi-mythical creature that accompanies the Prophet Muhammad on his miraculous night journey and ascension, known in Islamic narrative as Isra and Mi'raj. In this painting, the Borak takes the form of a winged white horse, as you can see here. Winged white horse with a human head that displays the characteristics of a Javanese shadow puppet character with its slit eye and slender nose. Underneath the Borak is the simple facade of a Cherobanese vernacular architectural structure, flanked by 2 kayon-like trees and Cherobanese rock patterns known as wadasan. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this is the wadasan. Upon further visual research, I found that this built form replicates a meditation site in Cirebon known as the Sunyaragi Cave, which is known as a place where the royal members of the Cherobanese Sultanate used to go for tapa or meditation. Painted on a brownish ochre background, the lower half of the painting depicts a typical Javanese residence complete with potted plants. My previous readings of this painting relied heavily on its visual components and its formal structure. I spent little time trying to make sense of the gold Arabic Jawi calligraphic inscriptions that encases the whole constellation of images. The image of the Borak that floats in between the sun and the crescent moon certainly provides a reliable anchor with Islamic visuality and narrative of the Prophet's ascension. The presence of the celestial icons and the sacred and vernacular architectures then tether the global Islamic visuality of the Borak to the Cherobanese cultural system. When not attending too closely to what is written, the gold calligraphy works to further imbue the painting with the essence of being Islamic. Looking closely at the text complicates the painting's meanings and renders it less legible, due to the text's refusal to straightforwardly reinforce the meanings that are so readily constituted by the images. The irregular calligraphic lines that Haryadi etched backward on the background paint already pose a challenge to legibility. But the presence of readable Arabic phrases throughout the painting, such as the basmala on the top part of the composition, the Allahu Akbar over here, and occasional recognizable propositions such as fi makes the viewer anticipate and hope for more legible phrases from the rest of the text. However, when I copied the whole supposedly legible text onto another sheet of paper, I exposed instead the text incomprehensible quality. It emulates many recognizable forms of Arabic and Jawi scripts, yet many are in mutilated, imperfect, or ambiguous renderings. The diacritics and star signs that are supposed to lend the text clarity further disorient the readers due to their inconsistency. It is unclear if some are just dots or unfinished lines, and they are not consistently present on each character. For this reason, I reckon that Haryadi's rendition of Arabic and Jawi in his paintings, such as this one, has the ability to displace the legible images and resist straightforward understanding altogether, especially when compared to Pirous' painting from before. Illegibility perhaps is innate in many of Haryadi's calligraphic experimentations, as Haryadi often draws his visual and textual sources not from the Quranic verses, but from Islamic talismanic writings and objects known as isim in Cirebon and Java. Isim are talismanic writings, diagrams, and symbols that traditionally possess protective or healing qualities. Therefore, illegibility in this form of writing is significant as it ties to the notion of secrecy and sacredness. Isim can be written on different kinds of medium, including paper, cloth, wood, glass painting, and even on a human body. And it is usually tailored to the needs of the individual for whom the inscriptions are made. Most of these objects also require the maker to possess a high level of knowledge and power derived from Sufi doctrinal teachings and rituals. And these are the examples of objects with isim, written with isim in Haryadi Suadi's family collection. And it shows that Haryadi collected these objects. Haryadi's adaptation of isim derived from a localized Sufi practice in Cirebon complicates the understanding of proper Islamic religiosity that was closely interconnected with the discourse and practice of modern Islamic art in Indonesia. Legibility and proper writing of Quranic calligraphy largely undergird the notion of proper religiosity as it is framed by the modernist and more orthodox perspectives of Islam. On an artistic level, Haryadi's engagement with local visual forms, techniques, and the materiality of Cirebonese glass painting also works to suggest the multiplicity of modernism in a particular place that is outside the dominant mode of Western formalist abstraction, taught and practiced by Bandung artists such as Sadali and Pirous. Haryadi's use of illegible calligraphic Jawi that frames the Cirebonese cultural and spiritual systems shows the heterogeneous manifestations of being Islamic outside of mainstream understanding and practice of modern art and modernist Islam. Similar to Haryadi, whose works bring forward the possibility of multiple Islams, Arahmaiani's adaptation of Jawi also serves to call attention to the diverse memories, experiences, and realities of Islam in the archipelago. Most importantly, Arahmaiani's use of a localized form of Arabic script is a way to carry out a reparative project for the image of global Islam. In several of Arahmaiani's collaborative and performance projects, such as I Love You, that I showed earlier, using Jawi is one strategy among many to show possibilities to view differently the relationship between Islam and the global world that is marked by violence and distrust. Despite Arahmaiani's focus on breaking the colonial, stereotypical, and racist ideas about Islam by using visual language and representations that are often rooted in her experience of being Muslim, scholars and critics rarely discuss her works within the framework of Islam. Many scholars justifiably locate Arahmaiani and her works as part of the feminist movement and the secular development of modern and contemporary art in post-colonial Indonesia and Southeast Asia. Arahmaiani's emphasis on centering the marginal bodies, in particular those of women, in public performance through exhibiting her own body, indeed challenges established socio-religious and political norms derived from what is vaguely yet often arbitrarily described as good conduct in Islam. Her method of acknowledging and confronting violence towards Islam, including those forms that are perpetrated by the Muslim majority against minority others, offers a critical edge that radically departs from the works of almost all male artists and the canon of modern and contemporary Islamic art, such as Ahmad Sadali, Pirous, and others. It is for this reason that I seek to situate Arahmaiani's works and ideas within the discourse of Islamic art in Indonesia, as they are able to deconstruct and decolonize the category of Islamic and Islamic art. Her works reassert and connect the experiences of marginal bodies, of women and minorities, through her nomadic self that disrupts mainstream ideas and orthodox iterations of Islam. In my chapter on Arahmaiani in this paper, I contextualize her practice within the framework of reparation and reparative feminism. Scholars have extended the notion of reparation in post-colonial and feminist studies beyond the concern of racial slavery in the European and US context. Eve Sedgwick proposes the use of reparative reading as an intervention against paranoid approaches as the dominant forms of cultural critique, including in Marxism, feminism, post-colonial and queer theory. Drawing from Sedgwick, Joshua Chambers-Letson further situates reparative reading within feminist and post-colonial projects and notes that various feminist, queer, and post-colonial projects have always been inherently reparative. Chambers-Letson defines reparation as a way to address historical injury and violence while acknowledging the guilt that comes with this process by coming to terms with the past, quote, as a means of putting oneself together, at least enough to be able to move into the future and possibility of love, unquote. Seeking the possibility of love in relation to the injuries of our past and present affected by colonialism and decolonization seems to be Arahmaiani's underlying determination that guides her works. The use of Jawi constitutes one of the strategies in Arahmaiani's project to redress the image of Islam in global media, especially after 9/11. Her engagement with Jawi, however, started in the previous decade with her controversial 1993 painting titled Lingayoni. First exhibited in her 1994 solo exhibition in Jakarta, this painting and several other installations elicited the unprecedented reactionary response of blasphemy from a Muslim fundamentalist group. The Muslim group condemned Arahmaiani for putting together sacred Islamic iconographies with other religious symbolism and what were perceived to be profane images. Lingayoni shows Arahmaiani's loose rendering of Jawi characters on the top part, as well as what seemed to be Pallava script that encased an inverted composition of Linga and Yoni. The fact that the juxtaposition of Jawi with Linga and Yoni drew heavy accusation and death threats shows the tenuous relationship that many Indonesians have with Arabic, as they mostly associate the script with the sacred book, and thus they ascribe sacredness to the script itself. Arahmaiani's positioning of Jawi within a new constellation of Hindu-Buddhist religious icons and script was meant to address global capitalism and the commodification of religion and its symbolism. But more than that, the use of Jawi with Hindu-Buddhist forms also reflects Arahmaiani's proposition of the quote-unquote syncretic as a category of practice. In several conversations, Arahmaiani proposed the idea of syncretism as the underlying principle in her practice as an artist and activist. She emphasized the significance of the difference in her family background as it informed her preoccupation with reasserting the possibilities of a different kind of Islam. Her father is a modernist-leaning urban Muslim, or what Geertz would categorize as santri, who was politically active in Himpunan Mahasiswa Islam, or Muslim Students Association, and an Islamic political party, while her mother, according to Arahmaiani, is more Sundanese and Kejawen. Kejawen is generally understood as a Javanese religious system that is syncretic as it adopts pre-Islamic rituals and religious practices. The identification of Santri as more Muslim and Kejawen and Sundanese as its antithesis by Arahmaiani seems to echo Clifford Geertz's enduring analysis of Islam in Java. Geertz's dichotomous analysis of Santri and Abangan/Priai in some ways reflects the Dutch colonial policy and reifies the colonial scholarship regarding the superficiality of Islam in the archipelago. In the struggle to claim Islamic authenticity in modern Indonesia, Abangan, syncretic Islam, and Kejawen, that is often associated with both terms, continue to be typically positioned as more Javanese or Sundanese, and therefore not quote-unquote real or true Islam. This categorization potentially denies the experience of Muslims whose religious system and practices cannot be neatly identified as Islamic according to Geert's modernist lens of Islam. However, I would argue that the identification and proposition of syncretism as a practice for Arahmaiani hold the possibility of pushing the boundaries of Islamic orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Islamic debates on orthodoxy have colored the critical valuations of religious phenomena, resulting in the condemnation of certain rituals and beliefs that fall outside of the dominant interpretation as shirk or worshipping entities other than God, as bid'ah or innovation, as haram or forbidden action, or as khurafat or ridiculous tales and superstitions. By returning to syncretism, Arahmaiani seeks to relax these rigid boundaries and cultivate and perform an Islam that is heterogeneous and open to embracing pre-existing religious and cultural practices, new ideas, and new worldviews. By referencing the pre-Islamic past, Arahmaiani also brings back into consideration and practice the indigenous cosmologies that were buried under layers of religious orthopraxy, following the coming of major religions into Southeast Asia, including Islam. Barbara Andaya argues that in early modern Southeast Asia, women often held a significant place in society as spiritual leaders and mediums before their positions were largely replaced by monks, priests, imams, and male shamans as religious authorities. Despite women's reduced role in major organized religion, Andaya also notes that the role of women as spiritual communicators who can bridge the supernatural persists in certain societies, and thus show that, quote, ordinary Southeast Asians continue to see the female body as an effective channel for conveying messages from the non-human world, unquote. Arahmaiani views her role as an artist as resembling that notion of mediumship, albeit not for connecting with the otherworldly realm. As noted by Amanda Rath, Arahmaiani perceives her performances to be a kind of healing ritual and herself as a healer, as she further suggests, quote, I believe that art as a ritual has a healing capacity, and the artist as a healer will give valuable contributions toward the future, unquote. Through her participatory performance works, she serves as a medium for communication, connectivity, and cooperation between individuals, communities, and nations, while addressing the wounds of historical and present injuries. The use of Jawi in the installation and collaborative performance in I Love You after Joseph Beuys, that's the full title of the performance that I showed in the beginning, is a continuation and reenactment of her ongoing projects that began in 2006, Stitching the Wound and Proyek Bendera Nusantara, or the Nusantara Flag Project. Performed and exhibited at the Jim Thompson House in Bangkok, Stitching the Wound emerged from a year-long community-based project that involved collaborators from the Ban Khoa silk weaving community in Bangkok, Thailand. Stitching the Wound offers several layers of engagement with ritual and play, with the community as well as with the public. Before the public opening on June 23rd, 2006 at Jim Thompson House, Arahmaiani engaged in months-long workshops with the local Muslim communities. She aimed to highlight the involvement of the young girls who made their colorful silk dresses for their dance performance on the opening night. Arahmaiani explains her decision to work with young girls from the community as an approach to generate an exchange replete with surprises. She seeks to bring to the fore the girls' voices and agency as manifested through individualized dress designs and choices of music and dance choreographies. In addition to these collaborative performances, Arahmaiani also created an installation with a soft sculpture titled Thread 2006. From 2006, this is the picture here, made of silk and synthetic fiber that is partly hung and partly placed on the ground in the main gallery space. This colorful and light rendition of Jawi letters is accompanied by another hanging textilic installation titled Needle, that was produced in a sewing workshop Arahmaiani organized with women of the Ban Khoa community. Arahmaiani asserts that she transforms the form of a prayer robe worn by Muslim women into a tent-like colorful installation made of silk. As with the thread, needle serves to contrast the heaviness of the representations of Islam pictured in Western media since Iran's Islamic Revolution. Both sculptural forms serve as a stage within the gallery where meaningful exchanges between the collaborators and audience transpire by ways of the dance performances and the circulation of specially designed cookies, also in the shape of Jawi letters. Project Bendera Nusantara, or the Nusantara Flag Project, is a nomadic and community-based project that shows how Arahmaiani's approach to addressing the marginalization of women also extends to other minoritized and socioeconomic and politically repressed groups. The project seeks to emphasize the value of pluralism and religious diversity, as well as concern for environmental issues, a logical extension from Arahmaiani's long-standing critiques against capitalism. As with Stitching the Wound, this project began to develop in 2006 from a collaboration with the community at one of the oldest Quranic schools in Yogyakarta, Pesantren Amu Marta, after an earthquake devastated the area. The collaboration is a material manifestation of the concerns, thoughts, and hopes that emerged out of prolonged discussions and engagements between Arahmaiani and the community by stitching words written in various scripts and languages onto the flags. The collaboration is not limited to the collaborative performance, as Arahmaiani also worked long-term together with the Pesantren to spread awareness about environmental issues to the students. Since then, the flag project has gone through several reenactments and recontextualizations, as she has worked with various communities in Indonesia, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, Japan, and Tibet, and several others. In several iterations, Arahmaiani showcases words written in Jawi stitched onto the flags, such as the one performed in Nagano, Japan in 2007 and in Yogyakarta in 2009. The photograph of the performance in Nagano shows the collaborators holding the flags with words written in Jawi, including Freeport and McDonald, a US-based company, including Freeport, a US-based company that has exploited the largest gold mine in the world in West Papua since the 70s. There's also McDonald and Toyota. These words represent the encroachment of multinational corporations and their exploitations of the environment as well as labors. The use of Jawi is similar to the way it was used in Stitching the Wound to produce a different relationship with Arabic script that has largely been co-opted to represent terror on one side and religious sacredness on the other. Jawi in this work is further used as a language to voice criticism of global capitalism, and thus opens a dialogue beyond Jawi's initial locus as a local and regional religious script. Drawing from the purpose of and material elements in Stitching the Wound, Project Bendera Nusantara, drawing from the purpose of and material elements in Stitching the Wound and Project Bendera Nusantara, I Love You was specifically developed to respond to the context of Singapore, where the performance took place. In this work, Arahmaiani and the group that she worked with aimed to address the multiracial and multi-ethnic social and political reality in Singapore, as well as to show vernacular Islam through Jawi script that carries an active expression of love. In a response to Ayala Lenzi about this work in 2009, Arahmaiani describes how the performance is significant in the context of Singapore, with its history of racial tension and where Islam is a minoritized religion. She states, "The Islamic teaching I have had from my parents and ancestors puts a great deal of emphasis on love. It is an important principle, and loving one's neighbors as well as one's family is considered obligatory. I know that the Muslims in Singapore are in the minority in Muslim Malay. I think the proactive legislation protecting the rights of minorities is what everybody needs. In this globalized world, people are migrating from one place to another willingly or due to economic forces, so there are minorities everywhere, and they have to be protected. I hope this piece of work will say something to Muslims and Singaporeans in general, something about equality, about kindness, compassion, and respect and solidarity for others, especially the minority. Arahmaiani's latest calligraphic exploration of Jawi on canvas continues to show the importance and persistence of Jawi as a decolonial strategy of reparation. Her series of Jawi calligraphic paintings were presented at her 2019 Song of the Rainbow exhibition at Richard Koch Fine Arts in Malaysia. Compared to the rather charged juxtaposition of Jawi with sacred Hindu-Buddhist iconographies and texts, Songs of the Rainbow presents a series of light and somewhat playful calligraphic abstraction of Jawi letters in bold yet soft colors, reminiscent of the soft sculpture installation in Stitching the Wound and I Love You. Jawi letters in these paintings maintain their individual integrity, floating in an organic composition on a bright pastel background. They are void of textual meaning, as Arahmaiani focuses more on the script aesthetics possibilities and forms, quote, using it to bridge different cultures or to stimulate associations and thoughts, unquote. As with her previous iterations of Jawi, the brightly colored letters are intended to redress and subvert the increasingly negative construction of Islam and Muslims by introducing the diverse realities and experiences of Islam and being Muslim, particularly in the Indo-Malay Archipelago. Jawi, as Arahmaiani perceives, is a, quote, living proof of flexible and hybrid cultural practices in the Muslim world, unquote. Arahmaiani's exploration and manipulation of Jawi certainly brings the script out of its previously narrow religious use and into the purview of her global audience and collaborators. Her use of Jawi builds on the effort and awareness to restitute a writing system that was marginalized by the colonial matrix of power. Sadali's note on the loss of Jawi as one of the causes of the impeded development of Islamic art in Indonesia is the first step to thinking about and understanding the impact of coloniality. Pirous' modernist paintings subsequently recover Jawi as a Malay textual tradition and a key element in the transmission of knowledge regarding Islam in the archipelago. His decision to put the Malay translation of a Quranic verse in Jawi serves to emphasize the importance of legibility as it ties to Pirous' ethical responsibility and notion of being a good Muslim. At the same time, the presence of Jawi next to the Quranic verse in Arabic and Pirous' Lukisan calligraphy also shows the degree of indigenization of Islam in the archipelago that is beyond superficial, as it was observed and noted by the Dutch colonial scholars and administrators. Haryadi's illegible calligraphy and subsequently Arahmaiani's abstraction of Jawi in her paintings and performances continue to reclaim the flexible and open nature of Jawi to show the multiplicity of memories and experiences of being Islamic that might fall outside the dominant modernist/reformist conception of Islam. In Arahmaiani's works, furthermore, Jawi is a tool to redress Islam by way of, one, alleviating the tenuous relationship with Arabic script that many Muslims in Indonesia experience due to the marginalization of Jawi and the use of Arabic only in religious context, and two, reintroducing a different image of Islam through dialogues and a network that, in the words of Arahmaiani, quote, enables the exchange of ideas and experiences or development in the form of collaboration, unquote. This artist adaptation of Jawi and experimentation with calligraphy, therefore, speaks to the persistence of the textual past that is open to dialogue, not only with international modernism that developed in the metropoles, but also with discourses of global contemporary art, nomadic activism, and global Islam. Thank you. Thank you for listening. That was long. And I would appreciate any insights, suggestions, criticisms about this talk. And yes, thank you so much. Let me stop share. All right.
Thank you, Anissa, so much for this absolutely fascinating talk. I enjoyed it tremendously, and I'm pretty sure that the rest of the audience did the same. And I think this is why everybody is so overwhelmed and needs another couple of minutes to type their questions into the chat. I think we can also unmute the audience. And so, yes, we have first questions coming in. Okay, the first, so yes, please start putting your questions in the chat, and we will be inviting you actually to address your questions to the presenter, to Anissa yourself, and it will be my co-host Karaguz, Alexandra, and I who will be inviting you to post your questions to Anissa. So the first question came from David, and David, if you don't mind, do you want to ask your question yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting, very impressive, and I can't wait to read this in published form or you know, whatever comes next. So expansive. You covered so much ground. You really gave us so many new ways to think about you know, Indonesian art history in both local and transnational context. And my question is, I guess, a little bit just an invitation for you to expand a bit on the early part of your talk, the kind of post-independence period, the kind of pre-Suharto period. So I know that Pirous, Sadali, other people as well as like Mokhtar traveled mostly to the United States, mostly with Rockefeller money. And I because I've been to the archives in the Rockefeller archives, I know that it's really funny. I think with Sadali, there's these comments from the administrators that are like, well, he doesn't really seem interested in the U.S. He really seems to want to use our money to travel to the Middle East. So there's these really interesting kind of comments about, and I guess I would really love to hear more about how you see that kind of international cultural diplomatic moment sort of shaping their work in relation to abstraction, their kind of turn towards calligraphic modernism. Yeah, I'd be really interested in that. You know, sort of what did they get from the U.S.? What did they not get? Were they in conversation with some of these more kind of like, you know, the kind of pan-Arab kind of conversations around cultural nationalism? So that's the first part of the question. And the second part, which is related, is more of an art historiographical question, which is, how does this help us move beyond Holt? And in particular, the kind of like Claire Holt's account of the sort of 50s is this kind of Bandung versus Jogja sort of, you know, Mulder's style, like, you know, abstraction versus like, you know, this kind of more socialist realist inflected style, this kind of Sudarjono style that's, you know, being practiced in Jogja. So those are my kind of related questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the questions. And thank you so much for your kind words as well, David. Yeah, for the first question, yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of artists from Bandung at the time in the 50s, 60s, they received a lot of fundings and fellowships from the U.S. Not only from the Rockefeller. I think there is one from the State Department. I think either Bud Mokhtar or Sri Hari got one from like ICA, International Cooperation, something. And they definitely made use of those fellowships to go to the United States. And I think there are several reasons for them to go. The first one is definitely to be in the U.S., to be in New York, to be in the, you know, to be in the center of modernism at the time. And the second one is for them to also learn new skills, basically. So Pirous learned more printmaking techniques in upstate New York and Rochester. And I think Sadali took classes in interior designs. And Sri Hari is the only one who learned more about painting or consistently paint. And so their periods in the US also, they used it as a way to build, to expand the school itself. So they gather like this new knowledge and development in design and graphic design and interior design, and they open up this new studios basically after their travel to the US. So Bud Mukhtar opened the sculpture studio because he was he studied sculpture in the US, even though he was initially a painter in Indonesia. And then Pirous opened a graphic design studio, and Sadali opened an interior design studio in ITB after their return. And that's sort of in line with this modernization project, like going into the New Order period. It's sort of what's needed, right, by the new nation in order to like build more things, to, to have like this more unified sort of designs that can be used in like everyday. So there is that for the first question, and I hope I touch upon the questions that you asked. Also, before their visits to the US, before their fellowship in the US, Claire Holt also helped them a lot in like trying to narrow down which schools they want to go to, and getting information is basically which school is best for them. And Pirous said that prior to 1965, there are also a lot of diplomats from the US, a lot of what do you call it, like from the embassies of countries, of US embassy and countries of allied with the US during the Cold War period, that came to Bandung to buy paintings from students, like straight from the easels, basically. But after 1965, 1966, Pirous said nobody came again after that. It's like, yeah, it's done. We're done. Yeah, so that's for the first question. And then for the second question, it's about Holt's account and of historicization of modern art, that often we have to reiterate this contrast and contradiction between Bandung and Yogyakarta. And yeah, I think it's, even though there are attempts by like scholars, by Jim Sapangkat, by Astrid Wright, to sort of get out of that dichotomous contradictions, it is also very difficult to do so, because that part of history is very much tied into these political contestations between, what scholars and historians term as like the universal humanist, and versus like the left nationalist artist at the time. So that part of the history is always tied to that political contestation that goes back to the 1935 what do you call it, the polemika budaya, and the cultural polemics, cultural debate, the great cultural debate in 1935. And that contradiction and contrast emerged again in the 1950s, because that's when, when Indonesia began to really try to find, a national identity, national language. And it was under Sukarno, it was very much dominated by the left nationalist. And artists in Bandung there's a lot of account from artists in Bandung that says that they were pretty much repressed, and they were afraid to exhibit basically during that time period. But after 1965, 1966, they said they found freedom. And this is ironic, right? Because this is really leading to the authoritarian regime of Suharto. But yeah, it's really hard to get out of that dichotomy of Bandung, Jogja. But yeah, but thank you for the question.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, you go, Alex.
We'd like to invite Hannah to ask her question if she would like, the next one in the chat box.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you all. I miss seeing so many of you there at Cornell. I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's a brilliant talk and will be a brilliant part of your brilliant book, I'm sure. But I, as you know, come from the vantage of the Americas and more transatlantic space, and I just wanted to bring to your attention, if she's not, the artist Cecilia Vicuña, who's doing some really, really similar things from the vantage of the Andes and activating a pre-colonial Andean form of writing that is actually a very sophisticated nodding system. And she's also doing these collaborative performance and installation pieces with women. And she's also both enlarging and making the text three-dimensional. So I just think there could be some interesting ways to hold them in conversation, even if only as a footnote. So she's creating these huge immersive quipus, which are traditionally small, but she's making them really large and inviting women and other people to come in and participate in creating them. And in doing so, she's really acknowledging women as the keepers of culture and the people who are trained to record culture. And so I wanted to just ask you, and you did touch on this a little bit toward the end of your talk, but how is Arahmaiani, is that right? Mm-hmm. Is she also acknowledging women's labor traditionally in some ways? And also, could you talk more about this idea of seeking the possibilities of love as kind of a decolonial strategy? I find that really compelling.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Hannah. This is great to see you. And thank you for the suggestions on the artist from Latin America. I think it would be really great to sort of put them in a conversation together, because it also shows that the decolonial project, or it is global, but also it's not like. It is global, but also local at the same time, right? Like it is not like, So I think that would be a great way to sort of talk about and sort of flesh out the theoretical aspect of the approach that I'm using, hopefully. And for the second, for the questions on women's labors. That is a very good question, and I think I need to ask Arahmaiani more about that, actually, especially in the project that she did with the Bankoa community in Bangkok. There's a video of that performance, and the video sort of documented her interaction and process with the young girls, and they make their own silks. It's like everyone is having fun or like singing together, but it doesn't show the makings of other things that she puts in her exhibition. So it's I think it would be I would need to ask Arahmaiani more about that and have her say more about that. And about the seeking possibility of love as a decolonial, I think when we talk about like feminist post-colonial projects, I think sometimes we often, especially when it comes to activism, sometimes we often, easily get trapped into, like a very paranoid mode of thinking, right? Like, and I think that it is important to, having this approach of reparative reading and reparation. I think it is important to sort of maybe push back a little bit of the paranoid readings and to be more open to the fact that there are violence and injustices in the world, but also to be open to, how people deal with them as well, and deal with them in a way that is like that shows openness and and surprises as well, that could surprise you. And I think her works tries to do that as she engages with different communities, and and trying to stitch words that are important for them, for their communities, and for them individually. So there are words like water, for example, in Sundanese, and it ties to the importance of water in ecological system, and in the local context as well. So I think the possibility of love also extends beyond just person to person, but also, between person and your surroundings as well, to not have that segregations between people and nature. Like there's it's all the same. So that's how I understand it. But I would need to sort of maybe flesh out more of that. But thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you. Thanks for your answers and your great talk.
Thank you.
Maura, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, I can unmute myself. Thank you, Anissa, for such an impressive talk. I think we're all bowled over by just how many threads you pull together. In some way, my question's a little bit of a planted question, because I think I know the answer, but you didn't really spell it out in a way that maybe most people in the audience would understand. And so I'll expand on it a bit, which is, when I think of Thailand and Jawi, Yawi, Islam, I think of Southern Thailand. And so the fact that she did this project in Bangkok, is a little bit surprising in some ways. And so I wanted to just ask you to talk a little bit more about the Ban Krua community and why that made sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the first, I think, attraction, sort of, for lack of better words, for Arahmaiani to work with the Ban Krua community, definitely because of their, of their Muslim background. So there's and their position as well in Bangkok, that is more of a minority, right? And there's more of a minority. It's I will definitely ask Arahmaiani why, if she's ever interested to work with, the Thai Muslim communities in the south, and Patani and other parts of southern Thailand, which I think, would be very interesting projects as well. But the project in Bangkok, I think she proposed it to a curator, Ayala Lindsay, that I mentioned in the talk. And then proposed it to the Jim Thompson house in Bangkok. And Arahmaiani has familiarity with Thailand because he spent some years, I think, in Thailand. After being threatened, after the death threats, and after everything else that happened, so she's been she's been moving around basically in Thailand, and she's been in Chiang Mai as well. So she's been working in Thailand quite a lot. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, please, if anyone here in the audience know more about this, if I'm not mistaken, that the painting Lingayoni, sorry, not the painting Lingayoni. Yeah, the painting Lingayoni was bought by someone in Thailand when she was in Thailand, and then it was sort of gone. Like, she didn't know what it was until it was discovered, or it was found by the museum in Jakarta, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Nusantara, and they found the painting, and then I think they exhibited it in Arahmaiani solo exhibition in Jakarta in 2017. So yeah, I think, and she found also the fact that Ban Krua, that people in communities in Ban Krua also produce silks, produce in craft makings and art making, and silk also sort of gives her, this gives her a way of engaging with different materialities as well. And you can see that her experimentation with silk, with the hanging sculpture and the form, sort of continues in her later works, and it shows how important that was for her development as an artist. Yeah, but yeah, I think there are more things that I should ask Arahmaiani, definitely. Thank you.
I love the connection. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anissa. And the next question is coming from Professor Gatty. So I'm wondering if Professor Gatty wants to unmute himself.
Yeah, no, just, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, thank you. A wonderful talk. I was just, wondering, I was struck by actually what I may say, the more recent turn by Rahmani towards kind of environmentalism and, and was wondering if, this new scholarship coming out by people like Anna Gade is that, so do you see this as do you see any kind of, let's say, a kind of a theme emerging, or some kind of a sensibility emerging both in art and in scholarship and in kind of general consciousness about the question of kind of Islam and environmentalism, specifically in Indonesia?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And I actually haven't read Anna Gade's book, and thank you for bringing it up. And I will read her work more carefully. And yeah, it's really interesting. In one of Arahmaiani's project that she works with the pesantren, with the Quranic school in Yogyakarta, and it seems that the project also the projects, I think, still continue until today. I think she's still in contact with the pesantren, and her works there, the collaborations with the pesantren and the students there. I think she showed me an article talking about sort of innovations in the way they deal with energy, and yeah, that is more sustainable and environmentally friendly. But her environmental activism, it's not limited only to Muslim communities or to pesantrens, as she also works with. Right now, she's developing the same kind of work in Bali as well, and that is her work that she continues to do in Tibet. When she came to Cornell a few years ago, she talks about her work in Tibet as well, and how she works together with one of the order, one of the temples, I think, in Tibet, and it still continues. It still continues until today. And I think I need to read more about this book, and definitely think more about this, about your question. But yeah, thank you so much, Professor, for the question.
I had another. Sorry, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
That has to do. I don't want it to sound. In Rahmani's work, a kind of childlike quality, or a kind of. I mean this in a positive way, right? So in other words, what do you make of the the kind of the big kind of fluffy letters, and even the paintings that look like they could belong in a kind of a nursery school or something, right? So so what do you make of that aesthetic in relation to what she's trying to do, right? In terms of is this a kind of a return, a renewal, a return to a beginning, a kind of the possibility of a new unfolding? to go back to a point, aesthetically, okay, which allows for that possibility. I don't know. I mean,
yeah, I think her like formal explorations, as shown in the sculpture in her latest works, it is certainly they are I think really tries to what do you call it, to sort of put a contrast to the ways Arabic or Jawi is co-opted by the imaginations of like constructed by Western media, and as this script that is so charged with they're so politically charged, basically. And I think she wants to show this other side of the script of Jawi as a permutation of Arabic, and shows the side that is like softer, more playful, I think, and more open as well. And I think in the painting that she created, the Songs of the Rainbow, the way I read like the compositions, that is so that is so organic. It doesn't have, it's really it floats, and it seems to also sort of breach out of like the frames. And I think it really wants to show the way she feels about about Islam, and about its manifestations, its material manifestations in those scripts. So I think she wants to present Islam that is sort of light and peaceful, and easily, I think, also approachable by people outside, like people who are Muslims, and also people who are not Muslims. So they would have a different relationship and impressions of Islam and of the script itself. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions, Professor.
I would, in the sense, to what degree is her work intended to respond to, in other words, the question also would be something like, to what degree is her work intended to respond to outside critique, and or to what degree is her work in a kind of unfolding with its own trajectory? You see what I'm saying? Like, in the sense that it's, whether you want to hang an interpretation on her saying Islam is X and she wants to present Y, which is a bit reactive, I think. Do you see what I'm saying? Rather than thinking about her own work in terms of her own kind of trajectory of artistic and kind of philosophical positions she wants to continue to unfold. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think her artistic practice is definitely much more focused on her activism, and her installation and her painting sort of just an extension of that. And also, I think also as a way to as a way to be, that it's a much more like consumable elements of her works, and that I think she could use to support her activism works. And I think, and probably that's why perhaps that her work seems reactive, that it's that her approach is always based on how she, how she does her activism and how she engages with people and communities that she engaged with. But yeah, I think in terms of aesthetics, it's in terms of aesthetics, I think her concern is less focused on that, less focused on finding ways of presenting or finding, or less focused on finding methods of abstractions that works for her, because I think she also thinks of Sadali's works, for example, that is very abstract, and Sadali's calligraphic works and abstract works as something that she's not actually interested in. And this is interesting because Arahmaiani and Sadali, Sadali was Arahmaiani's uncles, but also her instructor as well when she was still in ITB as a student at the painting studio. And she said, I think she confided to me that Sadali's paintings is too confusing. It's it doesn't really work for her. So I think she's less concerned about that pursuit of aesthetics. Yeah. Thank you, Professor.
We have another question from Panga in the chat, and perhaps depending on how you feel, this might be the last question for today.
Oh wow, yeah, there's a lot of questions. Yeah, sure.
So Panga, if you would like to ask your question and unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's just out of curiosity because I'm from Java, and after hearing your talk, kind of wonder why it is rendered as Jawi and not Pagan, considering that some of the artists are from Java as well, so they may be more familiar with I don't know, maybe more familiar with the term Pagan and not Jawi. But I think there's another question on the chat from Gatty that might articulate the question actually better from me.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. And maybe, Katie, do you want to sort of like add on to that question?
Sure. And I actually have to run in a second, so I won't be able to hear your answer.
Oh, no.
I have office hours. But I guess my question had to do with the regional identity of the artist and the fact that, with the exception of Pirous, all of the artists that you are writing about are from Java, and even more specifically associated with the Bandung school. I didn't know Sadali was Arahmaiani's uncle. That's super interesting. But so yeah, I guess it may be something we can talk about later. I would love to hear your thoughts. I guess how regional identity plays into your analysis of Jawi. And if you view Jawi, and this comes from my ignorance of the history of Jawi and its different forms in different parts of the Malay Archipelago, but yeah, how you view it in relation to regional identity, or perhaps its potentials for being a more kind of like pan-Nusantara form. I don't know if I articulated that very well, but thank you. It was a beautiful presentation.
Oh, thank you, Katie and Panga, for the questions. And yeah, as you both mentioned, Pagan is used as well as another term for Jawi, especially in Java. But Arahmaiani actually uses sometimes, well, it's interchangeable, I think. And I think for some people in Indonesia, it is, some of them are more more familiar with the term Jawi, and some of them are more familiar with the term Pegon. And for some of them, it's also interchangeable. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, for me personally, it doesn't really matter whether it's Jawi or Pegon. Although, I'm from, I'm from the capital. I grew up in the capital, so that certainly has a very different. Different. I have a very different memories than other people who live in Java and in Aceh, or like Pirous. But yeah, I think in Pirous's paintings, the Malay identity of Jawi is very much clear, and it's very much manifested in his paintings, because as you can see from the translations of the verses, I think it has some that Malay, poetic, that poetic Malay in the way it is translated, so I think I have to think more about this, about regional identity, and in terms of Jawi and the possibility of having that Panusantara thing. I think it would be a great opportunity to have that kind of research that is more inclusive to artists from different parts of the Indo-Malay Archipelago that uses or finds possibilities to use Jawi or to use Yawi, as Tamara said, in Thailand, in southern Thailand. I think it is important to sort of acknowledge that, but I think it is also important to show that Jawi is something that ties these regions together, irrespective of their national state boundaries, right? So Jawi then also speaks to the historical, to these shared historicity between places, but between Java, Malaysia, Borneo, southern Philippines, and southern Thailand. And I think it is very important to show that shared historicity as well, and to use Jawi as a way to get out of this national, this framework of national boundaries, nation-state boundaries. I hope that answers a little bit. But thank you for the question.
All right, thank you so much for answering all the questions and your wonderful lecture, obviously. I think we're going to close it because we're already heading into 2:20, but we can also save the chat for your reference later if you want to look at the other questions. Thank you again for everything. And next week, I would invite you all to come to our last Gatty lecture of the semester. It's going to be with Roger Nelson, and it will be at 8 p.m. So there'll be a wonderful close to this absolutely wonderful semester. But yes, thank you all again for coming, and thank you, Anissa, for presenting.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for your support. Thank you.